Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
4 years later, a divided nation's going to decide, Stephen. The US election. What should we be looking for?
The US runs a global ballot, as you're aware, but only Americans, quite properly, have the franchise. In this circumstance that confronts us a week or so out from Election Day, this is the closest presidential ballot since 2000. Al Gore and George W. Bush, state of Florida, hanging chads, the Supreme Court, and so on, which people may recall. Now, every American has the vote in the 50 states, but there are 7 really contestable states called the battleground states, and they range out in the southwest, Nevada and Arizona. On the east coast, you have Georgia and North Carolina. And in the Midwest, what used to be known as the Blue Wall, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Now, you've got to throw in Nebraska too, because the state of Nebraska will split its electoral college delegates, and Nebraska too may be significant in either candidate getting to 270 votes. So it's very close. The last 10 days or so are really going to matter, no question about that. The signs are that the voters are aware of how important this election is above 2020. If you look at the state of Georgia, the voting in the booths around Atlanta is extraordinarily high. Now, at the moment, that would suit the Democratic Party because in the main, it's their core constituencies that turn out, particularly African Americans. So that's happening at the moment. We'll just have to wait and see as people continue to vote, and a lot of Americans are voting now and have voted. So you have a circumstance in each state. There are different issues. The two candidates are defined in most Americans' minds, particularly Donald Trump, to a lesser extent Vice President Harris, who's done an extraordinary job from a standing start. Endorsed by President Biden, she put together a campaign that's in large measure unified the Democratic Party, raised over $1 billion and done things that people didn't believe could happen, like appearing on Fox News. So marks to her now. I give marks to Donald Trump for one dimension of his character, probably one dimension only, and that is resilience.
You've been actually pretty good this time.
That is resilience.
Yeah, look, he is, no doubt about it.
He behaves like an Atlantic City wrestling promoter, and he knows that cuts through. And there are research results to suggest that among the Trump constituency, there are a lot of people who don't take him seriously, but they like to be entertained. So they wait for something that he says that is truly outrageous on any given day. For Trump, that's part of controlling the narrative. So Liz Cheney, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, endorses Vice President Harris across the divide. What is Trump's response? Oh, stupid. So
yeah, but she's been agitated for some time, Stephen. You know that.
Yes, but it's important as Americans begin to focus.
Yep.
And most Americans don't begin to focus on the presidential election until after Labor Day in September. So the timing's important.
What percentage have already been cast in terms of the votes in the
difficult to say.
Yeah,
difficult to say, but it's indicative of interest when in Georgia, which has been very rough and tumble in terms of the state government literally fighting with Donald Trump over what happened in 2020, and there are Republicans too, Governor Kemp and Secretary Raffensperger and the like, that in the state, people still want to register their views and do it very early.
So how does the Electoral College work, the actual voting for the audience out there?
Well,
And is it a good system?
It depends upon your point of view. I would think it has some serious flaws in the sense that every American state has a delegation to the Electoral College, which is based upon their representation in the Congress. House and Senate. The exception is District of Columbia. But that means, say, that the state of California has, from memory, and this is from memory, 54 electoral college delegates. I think the state of Texas has 40 and so on, and it declines from there. So you have a ballot in which effectively you are voting for a list of delegates. That's where the arguments came after 2020, where people were elected in the system quite legally, and the state legislatures sign off on the Electoral College delegation. But shall we say elements of the Trump campaign tried to substitute other delegates unelected for those people who are properly elected in the ballot. And that's one of the arguments in the courts at the moment.
Wes, what do you think are the defining positions from both candidates? What's Americans wanting to look for?
The Americans would like to see a federal government that acts across the board on issues like the cost of living, for example. On the border and immigration, that needs to be toughened up. Biden has done things of more recent times, but the administration failed to act early enough. Now,
he hasn't done a good job there, Stephen.
People can't. We'll move to the Trump position in a moment. Simple fact of the matter is, in the United States Senate, the Democrats and Republicans, including some very conservative Republicans like Senator Langford from Oklahoma, from memory, they hammered out a very workable bill in terms of asserting American sovereignty on the border and asserting American rights to determine who enters the country. Trump sabotaged that. He's never denied it, and everyone in American politics knows that to be the case. So that has actually given Vice President Harris a bit of a ticket to leave there. Administration vulnerable on that. So you also have, in some respects, despite the fact the FBI says crime is down in America, crime in some areas is a real issue. No question about that. So you've got these issues running in different states and in different cities. I think the character of Donald Trump is also on the ballot paper. To a lesser extent, the character of the vice president's there. But overwhelmingly, people are going to look at the candidates and measure them up in terms of what they've done and what they're saying they'll do. For example, Trump's declaration that he'll be a dictator on day one is...
Go on, all right. You don't think that's flippant? You don't think he said he's just going to get things done?
Are you a moderator or an advocate here?
No, go on, all right, I'm listening.
So you're emerging as Rudy Giuliani.
No, go on.
You have to take Trump seriously. There's no alternative to that.
So you think he would be a dictator?
That's what he'd like to be. That's what he's saying. That's what he'd like to be. And the most important appointment he'll make is the Attorney General. No question about that. And it won't be someone of the like of those attorneys general who've, like Attorney General Barr, for example, who've occupied that office under a previous Trump administration.
Right. Yep.
So you have a situation in which Trump's declarations need to be weighed up if you're voting. For example, I found this absolutely delightful. Trump denies that he sent COVID testing equipment to Vladimir Putin, for whom he seems to have boundless regard. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's press secretary, confirmed that he had. So we now have a situation in which the Russians are more accurate on aspects of their relationship with Trump than Trump is himself, which brings me to Ukraine, for example. I think Trump would sell Ukraine out in a New York minute. That being the case, that's a huge impact upon the West.
He said that, hasn't he?
It is a huge impact upon NATO, and it's a huge impact upon American allies everywhere, including Australia.
Well, how did Ukraine come about, Stephen? It didn't come under the watch of Donald Trump. There was two times Putin's flexed his muscles in that part of the world. One was under Obama, and wonders under Biden.
We've been in a second Cold War since Putin invaded Georgia in 2006. The West just doesn't seem to realise that the victory of the first Cold War was squandered. Simple fact of the matter is, Putin saw opportunity.
You saw weakness
in a moribund. Well, you use that word. You use that word.
You don't
let's just measure it up in terms of the facts.
Yep.
I know we live in a post-fact world. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But the facts are, Putin lost the war the minute the first Russian tank crossed the Ukrainian border. Look at the facts. They couldn't take Kyiv. They were thrown back at Hostomel. And then there's been a long, very bloody series of engagements. But Putin's position overall, this is what he said, not what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. He wanted no more NATO on his border.
Yep.
He now has 1,300 kilometres more NATO on his border because Finland and Sweden formally joined the alliance. Mm. That basically locks up the Baltic Sea. That is a huge strategic loss for the Russians. Now, what Biden did, and this is called leadership, is he reactivated essentially a moribund alliance, supplied the necessary drive, and equipped Ukraine to the extent that they can resist effectively. And that's continuing at the moment.
So you think the Americans are doing a good job in their support to the Ukrainians there?
I think a lot of countries are doing a good job. US, UK and others. Australia, for example.
And you don't think Russia's going to get that land?
Well, they'll hold on to what they have, but it doesn't matter much. What will happen when the eventual peace comes is the economic reconstruction on both sides is going to show just what a shabby system Putin has and what a promise the West offers in terms of economic growth, be it through the EU or other Western agencies.
What about Afghanistan?
What about Afghanistan?
What about the withdrawal out of that?
Oh, it was botched massively. But a lot of it comes down to the deal that Trump struck with the Taliban when he was in office.
Yes, but he didn't withdraw in 5 minutes flat on a particular date.
It could have
and
been
leave everything there for the Taliban.
It could have been much better handled, no question.
Oh, well, why don't you talk about that then?
I just said it could have been much better handled.
So for a president, so Biden opened the doors, didn't he?
Well, he'd always been of the view that the US should get out of Afghanistan. It's a question of how they were to do it. And I think a staged withdrawal would have been infinitely better than the immediate departure that the Biden administration settled upon.
So what do you think? What do you actually think the Biden-Harris ticket for the last 4 years has actually done well?
If you look at where the United States was economically 4 years ago and where it is now...
Oh, yeah, that's COVID.
No, it is not COVID. Oh, look, that's an immediate Trump defence.
No. Really, I thought he did a very good job in terms of employment, in terms of growth of the economy.
No, he didn't. The simple fact of the matter is the bipartisan legislation that's been through the US Congress has revitalised the US economy. And what they've done on an issue like chips, for example, full marks to Senator John Cornyn, Republican, Texas here too, has really altered the strategic balance. And I think when American historians, and I know for the Trump mob, American history is the time before Beavis met Butthead. I understand that. But when American historians look at Joe Biden and his administration, they'll come down pretty close to where Harry Truman was in terms of being underestimated and delivering.
All right. So tell us about Kamala. What do you know about her? What has she done during her career which makes her a standout leader?
I think anyone who's been a prosecutor, Attorney General of California and the like has been under enormous pressure and has come through. As a US Senator, she developed a relationship with her peers and developed a reputation sufficient to be tapped as the Vice President.
She didn't get a vote. She didn't get a vote first time around. She wasn't nominated, remember?
What are we talking about here?
Kamala Harris.
Yes.
Right, so when...
In 2020, she was on the ticket and she was elected Vice President of the United States. Have you forgotten that?
No, I haven't forgotten that. But pre that, she wasn't even up. She was overpassed by everybody else in the actual run.
Yeah, in the primaries.
Correct.
She polled Pollock. Yeah, but that's not a circumstance.
So why was she picked
That's
then?
not a circumstance which is definitive. You could make the same case against Joe Biden before he was tapped by Barack Obama. American politics is sometimes a matter of geography, sometimes a matter of ideology, sometimes a matter of personality, as well as all the other issues. So someone from Delaware is balanced out by someone from California. She is a person of colour in terms of a mix of African American and Asian parentage. And I think from a standing start when Joe Biden tapped her to where she is now, it's quite remarkable. I can't think of another example of someone who's come in, come to the fore, gone through the convention, been endorsed, seen her stocks rise at the polls, take on Donald Trump, who is brutal in terms of a campaigner, stay on her feet and be highly competitive going into the election. I can't think of another person who's done that. Where she's perhaps missed a point, and Joe Biden's trying to hold the door open for her here. And if you compare her situation with that of Hubert Humphrey in 1968, Humphrey distanced himself as vice president from Lyndon Johnson, particularly on Vietnam, and saw his stocks rise. Harris to date has not really done that, even though the president is saying she'll be her own woman, she'll be a different president, and so on and so forth. I think that's an important matter for her to address.
So why hasn't she come out outside just recently and engaged the press openly and properly?
Oh, come on.
No, come on.
Come on.
Come on.
Where is your man? This really irritates me. She fronts Fox News, but she also fronts
That was probably, I think, due to panic.
60 Minutes.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
she fronts 60 Minutes. Where was Trump? He refused. He's refused to debate again. So in other words, he gives himself a lot of pass.
Where's he refused to debate on?
Well,
Which station? She didn't turn up.
She has asked for a second debate.
Yeah, on what?
Trump
On what
refused.
platform?
Trump
On what
claims,
platform?
Trump claims victory in the first one, which is wonderful, isn't it? He was decisively beaten. Simple fact of the matter is, she's fronting, he's not. End of story.
Okay, but what's she going to deliver? What's her policies? So she was the border queen of whatever that language that's been put out there. Didn't show, didn't turn up. How many million of people have walked in free into America?
Well, that's a little bit like the illegal Haitians eating pets. That's the kind of meme that you have out on the internet. Now, I know people who are solid Trump NCs love this stuff, okay? You know, it's not only the law-abiding dogs and cats that are at risk, it's the geese in the parks now.
You haven't answered the question,
apparently.
right? How many millions of people have walked in?
No one knows. No one knows.
Enormous.
And it predated the Biden administration, and I've already said there were policy lapses there.
Yep.
The administration
But wasn't that one of her
key
key responsibilities?
Well, it was early on.
Yeah. Okay. So then that questionable on that. What has she delivered? Now, Vice President, you can't do a lot. I appreciate that. What has she delivered?
I always liked John Nance Garner's description of the vice presidency of the United States. He was FDR's first vice president, a fellow from Texas. They said the office of vice president is not worth a bucket of warm spit.
Right.
I'm assuming that's not unacceptable language.
Okay, so what's her economic policy?
Well, her economic policy, particularly where small business is concerned, is to keep the country growing.
How? She was asked how. She couldn't answer the question.
Well, why are we focused on the vice president exclusively?
Because she's running for president.
So is Trump.
Yeah, we'll get to him in a second.
So is Trump.
Yeah, okay.
So no. This is a circumstance whereby.
Well, I'd like to know if I'm going to vote what they stand for and how they're going to deliver, don't you?
No, because you are never going to vote for Kamala Harris.
No,
ever.
but her impact is going to be frightening if it's right or wrong for both parties, right?
It will be.
Okay.
Let's look at foreign and defence policy
Yep.
now, okay, that affects Australia. I think a Harris presidency would see large measure a continuation of Biden policy, which is good in terms of AUKUS, it's good in terms of the Quad, good in terms of ANZUS, very solid. Trump comes back, who knows? He despises American allies. He had arguments last time with everyone from Britain and Germany to Japan and Korea. We're in a situation where we run a trade deficit for the United States, so Trump thinks this is healthy. But there are all kinds of things that can run off the rails under a Trump administration, all kinds of things.
Thanks for watching the No Limitations podcast, brought to you by Blenheim Partners, board and executive search firm. As a trusted advisor, we work with Australian listed groups, multinational corporations, large private companies, and social impact organisations on their most critical people choices to drive change, prepare for growth, and outperform their peers. To learn more about Blenheim Partners and executive search, visit our website, blenheimpartners.com. And now, back to the show. How many conflicts happened under his watch as president?
In terms of what? What did Putin?
In terms of war.
What did Putin offer him?
In terms of war.
I wonder.
Well, maybe when you build relationships, you've got to get to know the opposition, do you not?
Yes.
Well, it's not a silly thing, even though he got a lot of criticism for it.
Particularly Vladimir Putin, who seems to have a peculiar attraction for Trump. He likes dictators, doesn't he? He likes North Korean dictators.
You want to go to war with him, or do you want to get to know him? What would you think would be the smarter way to do foreign policy there?
I think the smart way to do foreign policy is to be absolutely resolute in terms of your values and make it clear to people where the red lines are.
Well, I thought he did that to Merkel. He said what Putin's going to do to you, which he did. He called out NATO, which he has. He made United Nations pay for the US Defence Force.
The United Nations
Sorry, or NATO.
Well, some of that was happening. Some of it goes back to George W. Bush, actually. But NATO is much more resolute and resilient under the Biden presidency than it was under Trump. I think that's undeniable. You look at everyone from the Baltic states and the Poles through to the most recent members. Look at the Germans actually beginning to spend sufficient funds on their armed forces. Slow process, but important.
Yeah, because they haven't spent anything for a long time.
For a long time. They actually believe in a peace dividend, which was ephemeral.
So let's flip it a little bit. What does Trump stand for?
I don't know. My honest answer is he stands for Donald Trump.
So you think he didn't do a good job in any component during his presidency?
I would give the Trump administration high marks for the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, outstanding.
And that has led to the possibility of a broader Middle East stability and the possibility of peace. So I think for Jared Kushner and people, marks there. And you can actually argue that that's what's brought on the current Middle East war. The fact that the Saudis and certain of the Gulf states looking at an accord with the Israelis, which would lock Iran out of the region effectively.
Yeah.
So we have the atrocities of October 7. We have the war breaking out in Gaza. We have other Iranian proxies being involved, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and so on and so forth. A resolute American response too, no question about that. I see they're using some of their most sophisticated aircraft at the moment in dealing with the Houthis, which is sending the right signal. And we'll see what happens with the Iranians, but the Iranians have gambled mightily here, and we'll see what transpires. I think Hamas and possibly Hezbollah are broken.
What's Trump going to do if he got in charge in regards to the Middle East? And he did a good job, as you said, in that first part, but what's he going to do in terms of Israel?
Give me marks for the Abraham Accords. Well, Netanyahu will try and wrap a lot of things up before November the 5th. In terms of Trump, he gets on much better with Trump than he does with Biden, quite obviously. Same could be said with Obama and the like.
Yeah.
Difficult to read. One thing I'd say about Joe Biden, he has been much more supportive of Israel than either LBJ was in the 67 war or Richard Nixon was in the Yom Kippur War. And he deserves credit for that.
Okay.
Well, he was the one who went to Israel and stood with the Israelis when they were under attack, which I thought was an appropriate gesture, which damaged him with sections of the Democratic Party's constituency, particularly in the state of Michigan.
Was he given much choice, do you think?
Yeah, American presidents always have a choice. They always have a choice.
It's only democracy in that part of the world. Surely they need the support, do they not?
Which other American president has done something like that?
Well, Trump's made some big calls in Israel.
Well, if you have a look going back since the creation of Israel in 1948, Biden stands out.
Okay. How much money is being spent in electioneering in these campaigns?
Billions.
And what's your thoughts on that?
Well, the Americans determine their own electoral laws. I never liked the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United, which basically opened the doors to unlimited expenditure by political action committees. You have a situation at the moment where the Trump campaign is, in terms of PACs, and Trump complains endlessly about money for his campaign. There are a couple of big donations recently. The widow of Sheldon Edelstein in Las Vegas gave, I think it was $95 million, and Musk put $65 million in, and so on and so forth. Those figures tend to be on the obscene side.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris has raised over $1 billion in short order from a variety of sources. And
is that since she... How much was already pledged when the ticket was squared away? I thought they had no choice. That's the story, right?
There was money in the coffers, and
Absolutely.
It was passed from Biden to Harris.
Yeah.
Because originally it was the Biden-Harris ticket.
That's right. So they had no choice, did they? They had to run with Kamala as a result of that. Because you got some... How much... There was a lot of money invested in that ticket, was there not?
I think the reason that the vice president was top of the selection list was the Democratic Party should not and ought not to have passed over a woman of Asian and African American background who was the vice president. She was the logical choice. However, coming back to your question, it's over $1 billion, which means that the Democrats, and this is interesting, have been able to pass money down ticket.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have the top of the ticket is the presidential race. Then you have governors, senators, congressmen, and women, and so on and so forth. So the Democrats have been passing money down ticket to some tight congressional races. For example, I find the United States Senate race in Texas to be quite fascinating. Everyone's favourite villain, Ted Cruz, is under great pressure.
He is actually, yeah, interesting.
From Colin Allred, who's an NFL champion, played for the Tennessee Titans, and really mopped the floor with Cruz in the recent debate.
Yeah.
Now that's going to be worth watching. I remember once,
and Cruz is articulate. I agree with you.
Lindsey Graham said of his Senate colleague Ted Cruz that someone could walk onto the floor of the United States Senate and murder Ted Cruz in plain view, and it would not be possible to get a jury of senators together that will convict the murderer. That's how popular he is. And Beto O'Rourke ran him a close race several years ago, and Colin Allred appears to be running him an even much closer race this time.
What's your take on the assassination attempts? What does that reflect?
It reflects the United States' ease of access for deranged people to guns.
Nothing more?
Well, you go back to the first assassination attempt against President Andrew Jackson in the East Portico of the Capitol. There was an individual there who was a painter. Speculated that the fumes in the paint sent him around a twist. He came forward with two guns, both of them misfired, and he was wrestled to the ground. That began attempts on presidential lives, and we've seen a lot of failed attempts, thank God, and too many, on 4 occasions, successful murders of presidents. And I think it comes back to the fact that you can walk in off the street in some states, show your driver's license, and walk out with an assault rifle. And I think that is just deplorable. And that's what happens.
Mm-hmm. We're going to have an election in this country not too far away. In your observations of the actual tactics being used, watching the American tactics play out, both sides, the advertising campaigns, the social media campaigns, the power of persuasion, what's your take on that compared to what we do? Well, it is interesting just to stand back and watch, isn't it?
It is, and American elections affect every democracy. There's no question about that in terms of what people are endeavouring to do in their communication strategies. Everything from the emphasis on the leader to some of the secondary or tertiary issues. One comment can be made now. I think immigration will be a much bigger issue than people perhaps realise, as it was in Britain, as it's been in France, as it is in the United States. And the policymakers have probably pushed the envelope just a little bit too far, particularly in terms of what happened after COVID and an economic downturn in some places and so on. So, yes, what happens in the US washes over in other places. Mind you, the thing to bear in mind, the US is a voluntary voting system.
Yeah, what sort of percentage do you think will vote, or roughly?
I think it's somewhere between 50 and 60% will vote. Probably closer to 60 than 50.
That's a big turnout, isn't it?
It is. By their standards, it's extraordinary. You've got to remember that for working people, it means losing half a day's pay or a day's pay to go and vote on the Tuesday.
And middle of winter.
Not propitious. So you have a situation in which our mandatory voting system, which has existed since 1924, obliges the major parties to focus on the centre ground. And that's why you have both Labor and Conservative looking at the issues which, in large measure, are kitchen table issues. That's as it should be. And it's why on the periphery you have parties such as the Greens who are trying to scoop up the disaffected in any way they can.
Yeah. Stephen, we haven't covered one really important element, Roe v. Wade.
Very important. I've held the view for over a year, and I'm on record as saying this, that the election will be decided in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And the voters who will decide it are American women, and the issue is reproductive rights. And Trump has tried to wriggle out of the fact that he boasted about appointing the Supreme Court justices who overturned settled American law of half a century standing in rolling Roe v. Wade back. So that issue is there. It motivates people to vote, and I think it will be telling.
Just on Roe v. Wade, is it down to the individual states to make the decision? So it's not really necessarily driven by federal politics in that sense, is it?
No.
So that seems to be a bit misconstrued.
Not unless Donald Trump endeavours to have a national abortion ban.
Has he ever said that?
Trump says everything and nothing all the time. I'm not sure what Vance has said either, but if there were an attempt in the Congress to have a national abortion ban, the issue shifts. By the way, just an interesting comment. I find this interesting. I'm in Las Vegas looking at the bookmakers. Some of the bookmakers are saying it might be a triple flip.
What does that mean?
Which I don't think has ever happened before. That is, the White House changes hands, the Senate changes hands, the House of Representatives changes hands. And if you look at the stats, that is really quite possible. Really quite possible. Have the Democrats increase their vote in the House, lose sufficient Senate seats to have a Republican majority, lose the White House. One follows the other in some respects. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. I think the Republicans are likely to take the Senate and the Democrats the House. But I think on balance, Harris is more likely to win the presidential contest.
All right.
And there's a gentleman teaches in Washington D.C. at one of the universities there, Alan Lichtman, who predicts presidential results, and his track record's not too bad.
Yeah.
And he's saying he thinks Harris wins. He's got these 13 keys to success. I just find that's interesting. But in a voluntary voting system, everything is subject to change and everything is subject to shift.
So we're down to how many states are it really going to come down to? Battleground states?
It'll come down to 7 states, being Nevada, Arizona,
Yep.
North Carolina. I want to come back to North Carolina.
Okay.
North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, plus Nebraska too. Now, in North Carolina, people may like to have a look at the gubernatorial race. There's a gentleman there, the Republican, running on the family values slate, who announced himself as a black Nazi, in and out of porn stores and porn sites and so on and so forth. Now, what does this mean? It means there will be certain Republican voters will balk at voting for him on the ticket.
Absolutely.
May not turn up to vote at all. So it might have an impact up the ticket and down the ticket. And what the Democratic National Committee has been doing, as I think I mentioned earlier, is passing money to down-ticket races, Congress, House, gubernatorial, and so on and so forth. So North Carolina is worth watching on the night.
Okay.
I love these family values candidates.
They're unbelievable, aren't they?
Overwhelmingly, they're the sort of people you wouldn't want to see taking your daughter to the movies. No. Anyway.
I want to summarise and get your thoughts on these. Right. So the Americans at the moment, the debt is enormous.
Oh, it's appalling.
Okay. So if let's work through this. Debt for Trump, debt for Kamala. What's going to be done overside there, from your view?
They will probably ignore it, no matter who is elected. I remember Kim Beazley telling me a story about a conversation he had with Dick Cheney, who was then Vice President of the United States, now supporting Vice President Harris, of course. And Kim raised with him the issue of the American debt and deficit.
Yeah.
And
bigger than GDP.
Well, they spend more servicing the debt than they do on the national defence, which strikes me as absurd. Anyway, Kim raised this with Vice President Cheney, who said, look, Kim, you don't need to worry. This is the United States of America, and we're not subject to the same financial and economic pressures as other countries, so we can keep spending, et cetera, et cetera. Kim was not convinced of that, obviously, but that was the attitude of previous Republican administrations, and frankly, Democrats have not really moved in either the Congress or in the White House to address what's several elephants in the room. The last attempt to rein in the deficit that had any impact at all was probably Graham Rudman, like a generation ago.
Yeah, right.
A generation ago.
All right.
So you're right to raise that issue.
Yeah.
And the American attitude is, well, we can do it, and if necessary, we just print a bit more money.
Okay. Energy.
Yes.
Big difference. Trump's going to dig. What's Kamala going to do?
Dig, baby, dig.
Yeah.
I remember Sarah Palin saying that, and that's where I think it ends again. I think...
Hold on, they did export.
I think...
They become self-sufficient.
The Kamala Harris that's emerged during the campaign is much more realistic than the Kamala Harris of earlier years on issues like fracking.
Yeah.
And I think a Democratic administration will focus on renewables and clean energy and so on, but be quite realistic in terms of oil and gas.
In what terms?
Well, I don't think...
You don't think she's just saying that because she's got to get the vote?
No, I don't think...
She's been against it all the way through for all these
years. I don't
years.
think they will do what Hillary Clinton speculated on doing. shutting coal mines and so on and so forth, shutting down gas production and the like.
Tax.
So what emerges out of this,
Yep.
this election, is the Democratic Party has to occupy the centre ground. To win, you have to occupy the centre ground. By the way, if you look at the map of the United States electorally, you've got some standout Democrats in red states like Governor Andy Beshear in Kentucky and so on and so forth. But overwhelmingly, it's deep red. Well, you simply can't do that in American politics. You've got to contest everywhere. As a lesson in that for the ALP in Australia, you simply cannot allow the state of Queensland to go into a deep LNP colorisation, which I expect the state Labor government will struggle in the poll that's coming. I think most people understand that, and simply can't give away a couple of dozen seats. It's got to be contested and contested everywhere.
Okay.
Automatically, that centres the party.
Where are they now? Are they left of centre, in your view?
In terms of the Democrats, they're slightly left of centre, yes. Slightly. They're not Bernie Sanders, okay? They couldn't be Bernie Sanders. They wouldn't have the Cheneys in the cart. So I'm thinking slightly left of centre.
Okay. Tax. What are both parties going to do on tax for the individual and for corporates?
Well, I'm thinking that's what
or incentivisation of growth. They're going to turn the economy
that's what
around.
the Congress agrees to.
Well, where do they stand on the policy platform?
Well, both have talked in terms of lower taxes, but politicians always do at election time. What emerges is going to be an injection of greater realism in terms of what can get the necessary majority, particularly if the Democrats control the House and the Republicans the Senate. It will be compromise. So, a new tax regime? Probably. Will it address the fundamentals, debt and deficit? No. It will probably result in a slightly lower impost upon corporates, perhaps even a lower impost upon some of the taxpayers who are towards the bottom of the scale. Mind you, you may disagree. Trump's tax cuts last time favoured those at the top, heavily favoured those at the top. If Trump has his way, they will again. But I don't think you're going to see Congress being prepared simply to tick that off.
Okay. Other big thing for Americans in particular, healthcare.
Well, this is fascinating. I mean, the debate on American national health care began in 1948 in the Truman administration when the American Medical Association denounced the president for wanting to introduce universal health care, which is what the British Labor government was doing at the time, of course, as socialised medicine. So you have that argument that's run right through to Obamacare, through Lyndon Johnson, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on and so forth. So you'll have a circumstance in which Trump's claim that he has a concept of a plan that's an alternative to Obamacare, and I'm sorry, I regard this as laughable.
Yeah, but did you think Obamacare was any good?
A concept, massive improvement on what was there before. A concept of a healthcare program, that'll be put to the test. I'm guessing there is no plan and there's not even a concept from Trump. I think in terms of a Democratic administration, they've been able to do very good things in terms of prescription drugs, in terms of negotiating with the drug companies and the like. That's particularly valuable for seniors. It's that kind of detail that has an impact.
Defence. Where do both parties stand there on what they're going to invest in defence?
Well, I think a lot of that is important to Australia, AUKUS Pillar 2, for example. AUKUS Pillar 2 is probably far more significant in terms of the technologies that are involved for the future, in terms of Korea coming in, as well as Canada and New Zealand. But Korea is particularly significant here. And working with our allies and partners to take a technological leap well into this century. The Americans are pivotal in that. Now, declaration, and we know that AUKUS in all its dimensions is going to be important to the Australian defence sector and to Australian defence industry. But Pillar 2, I think, is going to be quite extraordinary in its impact over time. I'm hoping Japan comes in at some stage as well.
Okay, but outside of just say this part of the world, has the Biden government spent enough money or invested enough, in your view, in defence?
Yes.
Why?
Well, the proof is there in the sense of the support for Israel in the Middle East, support for Taiwan, support for Ukraine, while continuing to have a defence posture to meet external threats. Now, what's happening is with American defence industry is that they cannot sustain the arsenals of the US armed forces as well as the allies. So they are working with allies to pick up the extra. That might be the Brits, it might be the Australians, and so on and so forth. That's the value of alliances, as former Secretary Mattis understood very clearly in terms of their national security profile. So you have a circumstance in which, yes, there is sufficient resource available. It's a question of how you mobilise that effectively on a global basis.
Well, what is it, one front they can handle at most at the moment? But you're right about the partnership.
Well,
And you sure Zelensky's happy with what the Americans have been doing in terms of support? And
Well,
NATO, I don't think he has been, actually. I think
he can't be.
Well, I think America's held back for a lot of the time, to be honest with you. But anyway, that's my take from reading.
And look, that's a legitimate point of view.
Yeah.
But I think the Americans have been very careful not to provoke the Russians into going the extra step to a tactical nuclear war. That's where I think we are.
Sure, the long-range missile sending. I mean, yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yep.
So I think that caution is justified. And Zelensky would like more, and I don't blame him in the least. Hey, he has our Bushmasters, which is an extraordinarily effective weapon. He'll soon have some Australian tanks, and there are all kinds of other elements in the defence profile that have gone to Ukraine. But the minute he says, thank you, that's enough, well, there's a lot of people who are going to pull their horns in. So I think he's always got to be arguing for greater assistance.
Okay, so we look at that theatre of war. Trump comes in, and I concur with you on this. You know, Trump wants to do a deal. And he wants to do a deal with Putin to say, right, no more bloodbath, no more money being spent. We can't afford to do this. You don't want to do it. You're going to get that strip of land. And you're going to get access to warm water ports. That's what I think he may do, but from what you're reading. If he doesn't win, what's Kamala going to do? We're just going to have an endless battle?
No.
Because I'm not sure yet what she's clear on.
I think there will be pressure on Ukraine to come to the table, and come to the table at a time when they've had maximum impact on the battlefield. And that's going to happen as a consequence of the deliveries of weapons in the air and on the land and elsewhere.
Russians have 900,000 men.
So what?
Has it worked
to date?
Do you think they're going to lose?
Look, Putin's original plan was to roll into Kyiv, murder the presidential family, install the puppets, and keep going to the border of Europe. Failed dismally. His casualty list is staggering. Yes. Absolutely staggering.
Do you think he's going to lose?
So you're going to have a situation in which Moldova, for example, won't breathe as easy when Trump comes back. You've got the Baltic states, NATO members, won't breathe as easy as Trump comes back. There will be no consistency in Trump foreign policy. There wasn't last time. There won't be again. There'll be a lot of chaos in terms of the national security of the United States and its allies. I think gradually the Ukrainians want to negotiate an end. They've got all this territory in Kursk that they've taken in battle. They can trade. As long as they can present a face to the Russians that says defiance, they're on solid ground. And to do that, you've got to have everything from F-16s to Javelins. Look at what they've done in the Black Sea with the Russian Navy through improvisation. I'm impressed by that.
I agree, but it doesn't mean they're going to win. That's what I'm coming from.
No, but there is no winner here.
Do you think
there is no winner?
And do you think Putin's going to stop?
Putin would like to keep going. He'd like to keep.
Well, do you think he's going to go? You think his ambitions are to go across the plains into Europe? Do you?
No,
I don't think that's the case.
I think he wanted to take Moldova though, out of Transnistria, to take Moldova and arrive at the European border. He's failed. He was determined to keep Ukraine out of NATO and the EU. I'm not sure he's succeeded in either.
No, that's interesting. China, we haven't discussed China. So you got Trump who's put up tariffs.
Well, that'd be a disaster.
Well, it could well be. I agree. And what's Kamala Harris's position there?
Well, the Democrats have not been
Democrats,
as forthright on tariffs and free trade as they should have been. Traditionally, the Republican Party has been the party of free trade. It is no longer. Doesn't mean there aren't free traders still in the Republican conference in the Congress, but Trump will take us back, I fear, and I hope I'm wrong here, to Smoot-Hawley, which was the most damaging of the Hoover administration's policies on snuffing out free trade during the Great Depression, made things infinitely worse. Now, Trump has mentioned figures ranging from 10, I think, to 100% in terms of tariffs. First people to pay that, of course, are American consumers. Second people to pay that are the people who lose their jobs as China goes into an economic tailspin and stops buying product, including our product. So I think that's really quite dangerous. The Democrats, they will...
Well, the Democrats have now started pushing that they're going to concentrate and develop manufacturing again.
Well,
are they not? She's now come out and said that recently, very similar to what Trump was saying.
They have done. There's no question about that.
Okay, so she's moved.
And in some industries, that is to be justified as particularly important to the American national interest. So I think the Democrats will simply be more restrained on those issues. They've got constituencies in the unions, for example, that would like to see greater protection. So they've got pressures there too. But Trump right out, and if Peter Navarro comes back in the trade portfolio, then fasten seatbelts.
The two vice presidents running, what's your thoughts on those two? And the impact they're going to have, is there any impact at all?
Well, I think with Governor Walz, he's probably having the same impact as Senator Tim Kaine on the Clinton ticket. That is, people think he's a really nice guy. They like to have him at a rally and so on. But does he shift the dial? No. Vance, on the other hand, different. Now, let me put a dead cat on the table here. What's Vance going to be like as a president under the 25th Amendment if Trump doesn't stay the course? If he's elected at age 78, does he make it to 82? Given his diet of cheeseburgers and chocolate sundaes, probably is not recommended for anybody listening to this or in public office anywhere. As written, none other than Rupert Murdoch has commented.
So what's your thoughts on Vance if he did?
Vance will try and continue the Trump agenda so far as it suits him. This is a guy who's sold himself as Appalachian, right? He's from Cincinnati.
Yep.
Come on. You know, he's elected to the United States Senate from Ohio on the basis of a $15 million donation from Peter Thiel, one of the billionaires out in Silicon Valley. I mean, he's done this really well. He was convinced and said openly Trump had lost in 2020. He does not say that now. So I'm thinking that if Vance steps up, it will be essentially a continuation of the Trump cult in an immediate sense, and then Vance emerges in his own right.
Okay. The the election counting, that was all up for the grabs the last time around. How bad is it? And you're going to say it's not, but
a lot
of people come out and say, all dead people in America suddenly come back again and vote. And that's not just one person saying that. You know that.
Who is saying that?
Quite a few people.
Okay, well, I'm going to do a Margaret Thatcher here. Who? Give me the names.
Well, I just did a podcast of just not long ago if a major significant person out of the US who said it.
Well,
and he said it's been there from day dot.
That's not what the American courts found when all the challenges were made by Giuliani and other Trump lawyers.
Yep.
I think there were 80 challenges. They were all dismissed in the courts, including by Trump-appointed judges. There was no systemic fraud in 2020 that could be uncovered because it didn't exist. Now, I mean, there's an old joke.
The nickname was Resurrection Day, I think it was called.
You know, well, there's an old joke, which I always liked, about the lady who retired from Chicago to Phoenix, Arizona. And she went down to see the lawyer about her last will and testament. And as she organised all the bequests and so on, she said, but I have something that I want you to put in a codicil that I am to be buried within the confines of Cook County, Illinois. And the lawyer said, well, we can certainly do that. Is that particularly sentimental for the family? She said, no, I'm a lifelong Democrat, and after I'm gone, I wish to continue to be involved in the affairs of the Democratic Party. We're thinking Mayor Daley Sr. here, of course. So you have all these kinds of rumours which have not been substantiated, just not substantiated. Hey, I've been in enough campaigns to know when there's a smell.
Yeah, reckon there is.
There wasn't a smell in 2020.
Okay.
There was just an overwhelming determination by Americans to say goodbye to Donald Trump and for some to keep him in power. So you had record turnout. Biden won. 7 million votes the difference.
All right. If Trump loses, based on what we're seeing, the assassinations, etc., is the country going to be split? Like what
is now?
Yeah. So what's going to happen?
Well, part of the problem is the American media in certain sections telling some Americans to hate other Americans, which is just seeped into their DNA.
Yeah.
So that's why Harris talking to Fox I thought was a very good thing, regardless of the electoral outcome, regardless of it. You have a situation in which people will try to divide, but other people will try and unify. Obama was a unifier. He wasn't overwhelmingly successful, but he tried. He tried. And you need to have that. Reagan was a unifying figure. He got some things wrong, many things right.
Yeah, pretty successful.
So you have presidents who rise above it. I don't think Trump can do that. I'm hoping Harris may endeavour to be a little different in that regard.
Okay, and if we roll it back 4 years and you ask the average American, based on all the polls you've read, are they better off now 4 years later?
They never are in their minds. They never are.
That's typical, is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I remember Jimmy Carter and the misery index, which then came back to bite him under Reagan 4 years later. And it doesn't actually matter what the realities are. It's the same in Australia.
Yep.
People always
think they're worse off, do they?
Yeah, in large measure they do. And you can understand that because they've got pressures. They've got kitchen table issues that are pressures. So I understand that. But you won't get voters applauding and saying, hey, you've done a great job. What they'll do is say, well, it's not a bad job. What else? What's next?
All right, I'm going to the polls. I'm in America. What's the number one thing I'm going to be voting on?
The economy, I think. And Carville's right. The economy's stupid. After that, it's probably an issue like the border. After that, it's probably Trump himself.
Okay. And you think Kamala's prosecuted her arguments well enough on those three key points?
Much better than I thought she would, yes.
Okay. Now, what do you think what Trump's been doing? In a sense,
Trump's actually been quite creative in terms of things that he's done.
Yeah, from an electioneering point of view, what do you think?
For running his campaign, I would have thought no taxes on tips is a good thing, particularly announced in Las Vegas. He's done some quiet things like removing double taxation for Americans abroad. There's quite a constituency there. He's doing things that are a bit different. For example, campaigning in Madison Square Garden, campaigning in Coachella in California, because he knows it will have an impact, not so much in the states concerned. Democrats will hold those states, New York and California, but it has an impact beyond. So his campaign has been much more creative than it has been. The weakness is he stands up there and rants and raves for a time and then starts going off on these tangents that a lot of people can't understand, me included. So you've got to ask yourself, does he have the wherewithal to be president? I've got my doubts.
Okay. So who is going to win and by how much? What's your predictions?
Too close to call still. I think if you look at the history of American elections, and I'll finish on this note, from 1932 right through to 1992, for example, from FDR's election, Happy Days Are Here Again, to Bill Clinton, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. Better example is perhaps Ronald Reagan, Morning in America in 1984. The optimistic candidate that projects a better future wins. Harris is trying very hard to do that. Trump tends to be the grievance candidate. You know, you're being hurt because of these forces, et cetera, and
Okay.
look at what they're doing to me, and so on and so forth. So I think if the optimism argument holds, Harris wins.
On that, Stephen, been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for joining us today.
No trouble at all. Thanks, Dan.
You've been listening to No Limitations.